All right, so continuing with our Feb-March 18 paper, 11 to 20, these will be the MCQs we'll look at in this video. So good X has a substitute, which is good Y, and a complement, which is good Z. The price of good Y decreases, and the price of good X increases. Why might the equilibrium price of good X, sorry, the price of good Z increases? Why might the equilibrium price of good X remain unchanged? Now, what you should remember, if the price of good Y decreases, this should decrease the demand of good X. And the reason for that is because if Y is the substitute, it's an alternative basically, and if an alternative or if a substitute is cheaper, people will switch to it, thus reducing the demand of the original product, which was X in this case. Whenever demand goes down, price also goes down, as you can simply tell from your demand and supply diagram. Just look at it like that. So price should be going down for X. However, let's look at the other side, where complement good Z. So when the price of Z increases, if the price of Z increases, it means the quantity demanded of Z goes down, because obviously that's the simple inverse relationship. But since these are complements, these are jointly demanded goods, if there is less consumption of Z, there would also be less consumption of X. That's something we have studied before, right? And hence the price of X also goes down. So in both cases, the price of X is going down because demand is going down. Again, prices of related goods, by related goods are substitutes and complements, are factors of demand. Okay, but why might the equilibrium price of good X remain unchanged? So you're looking for something that counteracts these two decreases in demand, in price rather, by an increase in price. So we're looking at something that increases price. If good X adopted new technology, that will probably reduce costs and hence reduce price. If you receive a subsidy, that will probably reduce price. If some firms stop producing good X, that means supply has gone down, and if when supply goes down, price increases. So yes, that could be a reason why it remains unchanged. D, the tax on the production of good X is cut, which means tax is going down, which means cost of production is going down, which means supply is increasing, which means price is going down, and that's not what we want. 12. At first, a television service is available at no charge. Whoops. The television company then charges viewers $6 per hour to watch its programs. The demand curve is D. What is the value of the loss in consumer surplus? And what value of consumer surplus remains after the introduction of the hourly charge? So understand, first you had this entire box, or entire rectangle, sorry, because at 0, if the price was 0, you're going to be watching 5,000, and obviously your consumer surplus is basically going to be the area above your price level. Again, price level is here, it's 0 in this case, and below the demand curve. So that is going to be your initial consumer surplus. Then what happens, they apply a price of 6, and that leaves you with this much consumer surplus, because again, it's consumer surplus is above price level but below the demand curve. So the remaining consumer surplus, if you quickly try to figure out the area, that should be half into 2000 into 4, that's 4000. Simple area of a triangle. So there you go. So 4000 will be the remaining consumer surplus, and now you just have to figure out this area. That's the consumer surplus that, let's say, was lost. So this is basically area of a trapezium. If I remember the formula correctly, it's half into sum of parallel sides. Parallel sides would be 2000 and 5000, which would give you 7000 into height, which is 6, which is 21,000, sorry. Again, I'm just doing the math a little quickly. You can take your time and I mean, you can do it, you can calculate it whichever way you want. As long as you understand which areas I'm talking about, you'll be fine. Anyhow, so moving on. The diagram shows a European airline market. New entrants have come into the market, shifting supply from S1 to S2. So supply is increasing. It's shifting to the right, which means it's increasing. Which area represents the new producer surplus? So just forget the old supply. We don't care about that. We just care about the new producer surplus. So that's going to be, if you remember, it used to be like if this is price and this is supply. Sorry, this is demand rather. Let me simplify this. If this is price and this is supply, it used to be this area. So we have price to be this. We have supply to be this, giving you this particular area. Again, I'm just ignoring the old supply curve. We don't care about that. So this is going to be K, H, and N. Or you can just say H and K, the same thing, right? H and K. Which benefit is most likely to result from a rise in the minimum price of labor wage rate? So your minimum wage just got higher. You have to pay labor more now. So obviously that would increase your cost of production because you're paying them more. It won't decrease it. A reduction in income inequality, yes, because people working on minimum wage are normally, you know, from your lower income class. So if, you know, wealthy CEOs, owners of businesses now have to pay your lower income class more because, you know, the minimum wage is higher, then definitely income inequality is going to be reduced because your lower class is going to be earning more. Their incomes is going to go up. Their incomes are going to go up, correction. Wherever you employ the minimum wage, if you increase it, because now it's more costly to have labor, the cost of production have gone up. So a lot of firms prefer to either just make labor redundant or to fire them and switch for capital, a more capital intensive means of production. So you do have a higher level of unemployment, not a lower level of it. Obviously, this can also lead to cost increasing, which can definitely lead to cost push inflation. So inflation rate will increase, it won't decrease. The diagram shows the equilibrium price and quantity of good X. The initial market equilibrium is shown by point E. What might cause the equilibrium, the market equilibrium, to move to point F? So basically, the way it can move to point F is demand remains constant, supply shifts to the left. Hence, the equilibrium would be point F, which basically means a decrease in supply. Supply decreases to the left. So this is for X, right? So if there's a decrease in costs, that will increase supply. That's not what we're looking for. If there's a decrease in demand, no, demand is supposed to remain constant. Otherwise, it'll go somewhere here, which we don't want. If there's increase, again, price of a substitute is a factor of demand. We don't want demand to change. If there's the imposition of a specific sales tax, if a tax is imposed, that will decrease supply, which is exactly what we want. So that's that. 16. The table shows the demand and supply schedules for a product before and after the government pays a subsidy of $4 per unit to the producers. Assuming that any extra sales are to new customers, how much do the original customers or the original consumers, sorry, of the product save as a result of the subsidy? So you have to distinguish between the new sales and the old sales, and then look at how much the old buyers, you know, the old sales, how cheaper are those, how much do they save? So firstly, follow me with this. Just ignore the subsidy at the moment. Look at quantity demanded before. Quantity demanded is going to remain the same, but look at quantity supplied before the subsidy. And again, equilibrium is where quantity demanded is equals to quantity supplied, right? So where are these two equal? They're equal here. So your original so originally what was happening, you were buying 150 units was your equilibrium quantity or your quantity traded, you can say, and it was at price 10. So what was like the old expenditure? So expenditure of your old customers, that was again total expenditure or total revenue is the same thing, because revenue for the producer is just expenditure for the consumer. So it has the same formula, price into quantity. That is 10 into, you don't have to add these or anything, because if you remember at this particular point, this was quantity demanded equals to quantity supplied. So this is going to be 150. The quantity traded is going to be 150. So previously they were paying 1500. Now what happens now? You have to first figure out the new equilibrium where quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal. That's 200 and 200. So the new equilibrium is 200 units at price 8. However, they've asked us to assume that the additional units, the additional sales are to new consumers, which we don't care about. We care about the original consumers. So we'll assume that the original consumers are still buying the 150 units. The extra 50 units that we see here are to new consumers. We don't care about them. So we're assuming the old consumers still buy 150 units into the price, which is 8. So their total expenditure now is going to be 150 into 8, which is 1200. So their original total expenditure was 1500. Now the total expenditure of those same people buying the same units is 1200, which means that they save 300 due to the subsidy. Which statement about transfer payments is correct? So transfer payments are basically payments that are made without any good or service received. So they're basically, it's like when your grandmother gives you your pocket money, you haven't done anything in exchange for that or to deserve it. She just gives it to you. A more realistic example is like stuff like unemployment benefits. You're not doing anything. It's not like you're providing them a service for which the government is paying you. You're just there and the government is paying you. Something of that sort. So transfer payments are intended to reward productive economic activity. Quite the opposite. They're not paid as a reward or as a payment for economic activity. Transfer payments are only financed by the government. No, your grandma can give you some pocket money. That's also theoretically a transfer payment. Transfer payments may result in a disincentive to work. Most definitely, if you get paid for doing nothing, which is basically what unemployment benefits do, they're paying you for doing nothing, then why would you want to work? Which is why previously some countries, especially I think the UK, I'm not too sure, but they reduced unemployment benefits, because if you're getting paid less for sitting around, then you'll have a really huge incentive to work. But if unemployment benefits are there, definitely they do reduce the incentive to work. They result in a disincentive or a discouragement to work because you're getting paid anyways. Transfer payment will include the sales of new cars. I mean, they're just kind of high here. I mean, like, I don't know. And include the sales of new cars. I mean, this is just so irrelevant. I don't even know how to explain why it's irrelevant. 18. What is the major problem associated with the government directly providing the correct amount of a public good? Okay. So competition from private producers. Private producers do not produce public goods, so they're not going to be competing. Estimation of demand, probably. Increased trade diversion. I don't see how trade will divert or anything. I don't even see the link to trade here. You usually don't import public goods or export public goods. You don't export street lights or roads anyways. Because that stuff, the private sector just isn't producing that stuff. You can't pay or charge a price for it anyways. So there's not really any trade that goes around with public goods in the first place. So you can cross that out. Rivalry, public goods are non-rival by definition, so that can't be it. Estimation of demand is something that really does, like estimations, like, or something that does happen. You've read this when you read about your command or your planned economic system. A lot, there are basically governments just estimating, central bodies, authorities just estimating how much of a particular good the people wanted. So there's a lot of estimation and guesswork that goes about, as opposed to the market, where the market is a much more efficient signal. However, governments can't use the market, especially for public goods where you don't even have a particular price. So it's estimation, and that's the issue. An aggregate demand curve slopes downwards from left to right. Yes, it does. This is your price level. On your x-axis, you can take a number of things. Let's just take national income. This is your AD. One reason for this is that a reduction in the average price level will lead to, so you have to show how a reduction in the average price level will somehow increase national income. By national income, you can think of this as overall income in the economy. You can think of this as GDP. So output of the economy, as you'll study in A2, they're really just the same thing. Anyhow, average price level decrease does not decline the country's international competitiveness. A decrease in price level should increase the competitiveness because the prices of exports go down. An increase in interest rates, that just makes no sense. It has no link, because what's the link between price levels and interest rates? And if anything, an average price level decrease means some sort of a deflationary pressure. Normally, if there's a deflationary pressure, governments seek to cut down interest rates in order to stimulate the economy. Governments do not normally react to deflationary pressures by increasing interest rates, which is by nature also contractionary and will just further add to deflationary pressures. An increase in the real value of money balances. So that does happen if you if the reduction in the average price level, if prices go down, inflation goes down, then the real value of money definitely goes up. So one could say that, and one could also link it back to this, because if the real value of money goes up, then whatever you have with regards to income should also increase, because this is your real income. So your output may be the same. However, with regards to real income, it gets better. It improves. It increases, because let's say your GDP, you can take real GDP on the x-axis as well. It's really the same thing. So GDP is like the monetary value of your output, right? To put it very simply. So real GDP would have some particular monetary value of your output. If you decrease your inflation rate, then your money value increases, and hence your real GDP should also be affected should it be affected positively? In fact, real GDP might not have an effect, because it's already been taken into account. Inflation's been taken into account. But if you look at the statement in and in of itself, it does make sense. Reduction in price level reduces inflation rate, increases the real value of money. D doesn't really make sense, because a reduction in the average price level will lead to the expectation of further price falls. If it leads to the expectation of further price falls, one could link it by saying if further price falls, if it's the expectation of that further price falls, then stuff like investments and all also reduce. Consumption also reduces, which should reduce your aggregate demand, leading to which makes sense, in fact. So maybe it'll be clear when I check my answers, which I'll do like after 20, so like after one MCQ, so pretty close by. But I would go with D. The reason is because while C is also correct in terms of a statement, I don't necessarily see how C can help you figure out why at a lower price level aggregate demand is lower. Why does aggregate demand decrease with a decrease in price? We can't see that in C. In D, a decrease in the price level definitely does decrease. It definitely does lead to the expectation that price will fall further. What does that do, especially with regards to investments? If it leads to the expectation that prices will fall further, basically means that investment expenditure should go down, because no one wants to invest in a economy undergoing recession. So investments go down. Consumers also become more wary, one could say. They hold back their consumption as well in anticipation that prices will fall further, so we'll consume later. Let's not consume now. As opposed to what they do in an inflation. In an inflation, they believe prices will keep on rising, so they bring forward their consumptions. Here, since they believe that it will get cheaper later on, let's just consume later on, let's not consume now, they reduce their consumptions. All of this leads to lower aggregate demand, which kind of goes with this. At a lower price, you have what you could say a lower level of aggregate demand. But in fact, what's going on? No. So at a lower level of price, my apologies, I don't know what's wrong with me today. So at a lower level of price, in fact, you're supposed to have a greater level of either national income, a greater level of aggregate demand. My bad. There's an inverse relationship, which is why it's downward sloping. So because of that, this kind of violates the relationship overall, because this shows why aggregate demand would be lower at lower price levels. However, since there's an inverse relationship, it's supposed to be higher at lower price levels. And if price falls, national income, output, aggregate demand, all of that should increase, not decrease. My apologies. So that leaves you with the logic that I explained for C. In the diagram, an economy is initially in equilibrium at point X. The government increases spending on education. This coincides with an increase in the wage rate inflation, which point shows the most likely short-run equilibrium of the economy. Okay, this is nice. Spending on education. What should government expenditure do? Government expenditure is a factor of aggregate demand. It increases aggregate demand. This coincides with an increase in wage rate inflation. If there is wage rate inflation, so basically inflation that comes about by increases in wage rate, so cost push inflation, which basically means a reduction in aggregate supply. Now, I believe someone showed me this question before, and they were confused in whether or not spending on education would increase your aggregate supply, because education is obviously a supply side policy. And it wouldn't really, because it has a very long-term effect. There's a lot of time lags. There's a significant time lag involved with it. If you spend on education today, that doesn't mean your aggregate supply will increase today. It means your aggregate supply might see some changes 10 years down the road, right? And they're talking about the short-run equilibrium. So in the short-run equilibrium, we won't take into account the benefit towards aggregate supply that education has. In the long run, education might increase productivity and increase aggregate supply. For now, we'll just take these two effects. So increase in AD goes like this. Decrease in aggregate supply goes like this. So you get C. And let's quickly check my answers. All right, so we're good. All of our questions were fine so far. All of our answers are correct. My apologies for the rambling I did in 19. I hope it's clear why it's C, because that's really just the only correct option. D was wrong. My bad. And that's it. We'll continue and finish this paper off in the next video.